A heavy door groans as it closes. The world beyond feels foreign, muted, distant, while the factory inside is alive. 1,000 machines converse in metallic voices. Sparks scatter like brief stars. Heat hangs in the air. Rosie stands at the threshold. Her bandana is red with white polka dots. Oil smudges her cheek. She breathes in a factory odor, hot metal, cutting fluid, and sweat. Her hands, calloused from small chores, tremble when she lifts the rivet gun for the first time. This is not a uniformed battlefield. Yet everything about it will matter as much as any combat zone. Here, rivets and bolts, and the precise alignment of parts will shape the fate of nations. In a world that told them to sew and to wait, a new task called, men left for distant fronts. Machines needed hands. Citizens needed courage. Rosie answered the call. The old world and the warning signs. Before the war touched American soil, Rosie's life was ordinary in a way that seemed timeless. She kept house for her widowed aunt in a small Midwestern town. She mended socks, ran errands, learned to reckon the week's grocery bill. The world around her hummed in predictable rhythms. Church on Sunday, a steady job for those who had one. Dances in the town hall. Men taught trades. Women taught their daughters to be discreet and polite. Across the ocean, Britain's cities had already learned a harsher rhythm. Blitz sirens, blackout curtains, and air raid shelters redefined daily life. Women in Britain were called to drive ambulances, to man telephone exchanges, to serve in auxiliary services. But even there, stepping into heavy industry welding tanks, fitting aircraft skin was a leap beyond custom. Then, the radio announced the war's escalation. The news came like thunder. Nations mobilized. Factories, once dedicated to consumer goods, were told to make aircraft and tanks. Raw material allocations shifted. Skilled men enlisted by the millions. Millions of hands were suddenly absent from the assembly lines. The question was simple and brutal. Who would do the work? December 7, 1941. The moment the question becomes an order, Pearl Harbor. The words on the radio sent households reeling. Rosie sat on a rickety kitchen chair as neighbors gathered around, faces lit by the blue light of the radio dial. She listened to casualty numbers, to the stark fact that the country was now at war. The draft rolled forward. Factories faced an exodus. In the weeks that followed, the government, industries, and labor organizations realized that victory required an answer as large as the crisis itself. Trained machinists were leaving with uniforms and rifles. Factories needed to double, triple output. Shipyards must build faster. The skies demanded fighters and bombers in numbers no one had previously imagined. A new call went out not to the front lines, but to the engines and furnaces of the home front. It was a summons that would rewrite Rosie's life, and the lives of millions like her. The symbol and the woman. Rosie as icon and person. People remember the poster. The woman in blue coveralls. The red polka dot bandana. The rolled sleeve. And the raised forearm. "We can do it," it read. But that poster was only a mirror. The real Rosie was not a single woman who posed for a photographer. She was a composite, an idea, and in our story she is also real, named, and breathing. Rosie in this tale is 22, with a quick laugh and a stubborn streak. She is not a bold radical. She simply wants to be useful. Her brother has shipped overseas. Her town has been hollowed. She has watched neighbors answer the draft and not return as they were. When the Willow Run plant posts a sign seeking workers, Rosie takes the bus. She is one among a new army, an army without rifles and with coveralls who will rebuild industry into armament. The line at Willow Run. First contact. On her first morning, the line to enter the plant snakes around blocks. Women of every shape, age, and background clutch applications. Factory recruiters look for steady hands, willingness to learn, and the capacity to lift a moderate weight. At the gate, Rosie feels the weight of the moment. Her collarbone hums with expectation. Inside, the factory stretches like a city cranes, overhead rails, half-assembled bomber fuselages, suspended like the ribs of some colossal beast. Supervisors call out, foremen point. The air is full of movement. A woman named Martha runs the training bay, a veteran who worked the plant when it made widgets before wartime conversion. Martha's voice is a drill. This is your rivet gun. It kicks. It screams. It will take your breath if you're not steady. She places the gun in Rosie's hands. It vibrates, heavy with momentum. The first time Rosie sets a rivet, her knuckles whiten. The metallic noise is violent and personal. The recoil jars her whole arm. Yet, when the rivet sits flush and the panel locks, she feels a small, clean victory, like finishing a prayer. She learns that precision matters as much as strength, that the human body can grow into new tasks if given time. Over the days, Rosie cycles through stations: riveting, machining, engine cradle assembly, final inspection. She learns to read engineering drawings, those tiny, precise scripts that look like secret languages. She learns to trust the rhythm of the line, scale and sacrifice. The home front goes industrial. By mid-1942, the scale of engagement shocked the nation. Factories that once produced refrigerators and cars now turned out military hardware. Willow Run, in Michigan, became emblematic. Ford converted massive spaces into bomber assembly lines, building the B-24 at unprecedented rates. Plant managers, government planners, and union leaders orchestrated production like generals planning campaigns. Women filled shifts morning, swing, nights. Many left children in hastily arranged creches. Some walked miles at dawn in snow. Some rode crowded streetcars. The work was grueling. The pay was meager, relative to the skill and risk. But the returns were tangible. Planes rolled faster off assembly lines. Ammunition flowed. Shipyards launched more vessels. The Allied industrial machine was reconfigured by necessity, and Rosie's hands were among those that kept it moving. Danger, disease, and determination. Industry was not a sterile environment. It had hazards. Welders faced burns. Riveters faced metal shards. Muffled screams sometimes followed accidents. In Britain, munition workers handled TNT and cordite that stained skin and hair, a chemical poisoning that led to the nickname Canary Girls. Even in safer-sounding positions, repetitive strain and long hours eroded health. Rosie's days blurred into each other. Awaken, travel, work, brief supper, sleep, repeat. Fatigue became a constant companion. A fellow worker named Anna collapsed one winter shift from exhaustion. Another, Maria, came back limping after a fall on a grease-slick surface. They taped their wounds, and they returned. The emotional burden was equally heavy. Letters arrived with news of men killed or missing. Rosie kept a small photograph of her brother tucked inside her lunch pail. When the sirens sounded for a war bond rally, she bought a war stamp with several weeks' wages. It felt like giving a piece of one's future to an uncertain promise. Still, despite exhaustion and fear, Rosie felt a fierce pride. She saw the planes they built fly from training fields. She read reports that Allied production was starting to outpace the Axis. Each completed fuselage and each successfully fired shell affirmed that their labor had weight in the balance of history. Propaganda, music, and the moral economy. Governments knew that morale was fragile and contagious. Posters, newsreels, and radio dramas celebrated women at work. Songs, sometimes irreverent, sometimes rousing, told the tale of tapping rivets and saving freedom. The character Rosie appeared in popular culture as both encouragement and advertisement. Employers used the symbol to recruit and to instruct safety. Yet the narrative had complexity. For many women, the poster was both an empowering call and an uneasy simplification of their lived realities. Workplaces instituted classes and safety drills. The U.S. government funded part-time training programs to teach women how to operate lathes and welding torches. Labor unions, initially skeptical of women's entry into skilled trades, eventually trained women and, in some cases, advanced their careers. Still, inequality persisted. Women often earned less than men doing comparable jobs. Supervisors sometimes treated them with condescension. But performance spoke loudest. As women proved their skill, assumptions eroded slowly, painfully. Community, conflict, and the new normal. Inside the plant, Rosie discovered friendships that were forged in shared hardship. They shared lunch, swapped stories, and covered for one another when illness struck. They celebrated small victories, noon coffee, a safe shift, and mourned losses together. Outside, society strained to accept new realities. Some neighbors applauded, and others whispered that Rosie was abandoning womanly duties. Church ladies debated propriety, yet the war's demands muted many critiques. Patriotism, for a time, smoothed social friction. Rosie also encountered resentment. Male colleagues who returned on leave sometimes scoffed at the idea of women doing men's work. There were also tensions over promotions and pay. Different ethnic groups and recent immigrants faced extra hostility. Still, the plant's mission produce planes. Produce parts kept the line moving. Rosie's transformation. From trainee to craftswoman. Months into her tenure, Rosie's hands were not the same. She had calluses like armor. She read blueprints with the surety of someone who had spent hours learning the discipline of measurement and tolerance. She had a rhythm that matched the conveyor belts. Her foreman, once doubtful, now entrusted her with delicate tasks, aligning control surfaces, fitting instrument panels, double-checking critical rivets. One evening, after a long shift, she climbed to the scaffolding and looked out over the plant floor. Thousands of tiny lamps winked like a city of industry. A nearly finished B-24 hung on its rails. Soon it would taxi and fly. Rosie touched the metal skin, feeling cool beneath the grime. She felt an odd kinship with the aircraft, both shaped by human intent and human hands. She realized something simple and profound. Her work mattered, not as a symbol or a propaganda motif, but in the purest possible way. It saved lives. The wings she helped fasten would carry pilots who, without those wings, would never return. The horizon ahead. By the end of this chapter, Rosie has transformed from a frightened newcomer into a linchpin of production. The plant hums, the rivets hold, and the B-24 seconds roll out with a regularity that would have been impossible a year earlier. Yet the narrative is not tidy. Ahead loom harder trials. Accelerated production quotas, political fights over women's pay, dangerous new tasks, bombings closer to supply lines, and the weight of producing instruments of death, even as the workers pray for peace. Rosie stands under the fluorescent lights, grease-smudged and determined, watching the fuselage slide down the line. Outside the factory window, the first slender light of dawn appears. She did not enlist with a rifle. She enlisted with her hands. She did not wear a uniform on the front lines, but she created what the front needed to survive. And when history is measured not in monuments, but in metal, and in the names tied to that metal, Rosie's hands will be there. The factory never sleeps. Night settles over the Midwest. Across fields dusted with snow, the Willow Run plant glows like a forge windows pulsing, smokestacks exhaling steam into the cold. Inside, Rosie adjusts her goggles, lifts the rivet gun, and braces for the kick. A burst of sparks, brief, violent, bright. By 1943, America and Britain had turned their factories into war machines. But machines have hearts beating through workers who never saw the front, yet shaped its every victory. And among them was Rosie. A siren wails, signaling the start of another shift. The line keeps moving. Stopping isn't an option. Not tonight, not ever. 1943. The year industry went to war. If 1,942 awakened the women of the home front, 1,943 transformed them into the backbone of Allied industry. Production targets skyrocketed. 129,000 aircraft, 17 million rifles, 86,000 tanks, billions of rounds of ammunition. Numbers so vast that even generals paused to stare at charts in disbelief. Factories underwent expansions that bordered on the impossible. Willow Run stretched its architecture like a steel continent. Shipyards in California worked round the clock, launching vessels twice as fast as a year prior. British plants, though bombed and battered, rebuilt underground chambers to protect vital production. Every one of these advances required bodies, minds, and hands. Hands like Rosie's. Rosie's rising skills from novice to specialist. By the start of 1943, Rosie was no longer the trembling new recruit trying to steady her first rivet. She had become a highly skilled buckler, the partner responsible for holding metal flush from inside the aircraft, while another worker fired the rivet gun from outside. It required perfect timing, coordination, strength, trust. A misaligned rivet could weaken the entire airframe. Rosie and her rivet partner, Gloria, worked like twin pistons. They communicated in gestures, tilts of the head, taps on the aluminum skin, the subtle shift of shoulder weight. Words were drowned out by the factory's roar, so they invented a silent language. Rosie's hands hardened, but her mind sharpened more. She became the one foreman consulted when panels didn't align. She could troubleshoot warping, identify stress fractures, and coax the obstinate metal into conformity. One evening, the senior inspector called her aside. "You've got an eye most men don't," he said. "Ever think about stepping into calibration work?" It stunned her. No one had ever suggested she might lead, instruct, or correct others, especially in a field once forbidden to her gender. Rosie didn't have an answer, but she carried the question home like a warm ember. The soundtrack of production noise, music, and machinery. Factories had personalities. The pounding of presses, the screech of metal, the overlapping shout of foremen. Night shifts smelled of coffee, oil, and the cold metallic tang of fatigue. But amidst the din, workers invented culture. Women sang. They hummed. They joked, tapping rhythms on toolboxes. Someone brought a portable radio into the plant one night, tuning it to the Andrews Sisters. The harmonies floated above the mechanical chaos, as if determined to soften reality. Rosie, tightening bolts on a wing spar, found herself humming Rum and Coca-Cola before she even realized it. Music provided tempo. Tempo kept morale alive. And morale kept production from collapsing under exhaustion. Britain under fire. Women on the edge of danger. While American plants could rely on distance from the battlefield, British women lived and worked under direct threat. German bombings. Factories in Coventry, Birmingham, and the Clyde were bombed repeatedly. Air raid sirens forced workers underground mid-shift. Women carried on despite the fear, returning to their workbenches as soon as the all-clear sounded. The explosive factories, munitions plants, were the most dangerous places of all. Women filled shells with TNT, cordite, and picric acid chemicals so toxic they stained their skin yellow. These women were called the Canary Girls. They joked about their yellow hands, but the risk was deadly real. Fires, explosions, long-term toxicity, ever-present threats. Shipyards. In British shipyards, women welded hulls under freezing winds. They faced falling steel plates, sparks in their hair, slips on icy docks, submarine threats in nearby waters. Yet production persisted. Britain needed ships to survive, and women made that survival possible. Rosie read about these women in newspapers, pinned to the cafeteria wall. Their bravery humbled her. She whispered a quiet prayer for the Canary Girls every time she passed the bulletin board. The great social shift: women remake society. The war didn't just change factories, it changed society dramatically. Childcare. Many women had children but no one to watch them. The government built daycare centers near factories, operating long hours. Rosie often walked past the nursery building, hearing children's laughter drifting between shifts. It reminded her that generations were being raised in the shadow of machinery. Freedom of mobility. Women traveled for work, sometimes across states. They boarded trains without escorts or husbands, breaking old norms. Rosie rented a small room near the plant with 3 other women. They shared chores, meals, and secrets, forming chosen families. Financial independence. Every Friday, Rosie opened her pay envelope. It wasn't equal pay, not even close, but it was hers. She saved for bonds, bought shoes without asking permission, sent money home to her aunt, kept a private emergency fund. This independence was intoxicating. Dangerous, some said, but irresistible. A changing image of womanhood. She noticed subtle shifts. Advertisements showing women in overalls. Magazines praising the new patriotic worker. Headlines naming women heroes of production. Still, contradictions persisted. Society urged women to be strong, but not too strong. Independent, but not too independent. Skilled, but not too ambitious. Rosie lived in the tension every day. The emotional burden war closes in. The war's shadow crept into the plant in unexpected ways. One cold evening, Rosie returned to her rented room to find Gloria sitting silently at the table, a letter in her hands. "My husband," Gloria whispered. "Missing in action." The room fell silent, except for the ticking clock. Rosie knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her friend's back. They cried quietly, the kind of crying workers couldn't afford to bring onto the factory floor. Rosie also wrote letters to her brother. Weeks passed without replies. Every day, she checked the mail slot before her shift. Nothing. Fear gnawed at her. Not loud, but constant. One morning, she paused mid-riveting, staring blankly at the metal skin of the aircraft. What if the bombs she helped create brought despair to some other sister? What if her brother was already gone? A foreman tapped her shoulder. "You all right, Rosie?" She nodded. But the weight inside her was growing. The hardest night accident on the line. Industrial danger was inevitable. One winter night in 1943, a loud bang sliced through the factory. Workers froze. A section of scaffolding had collapsed near the tail assembly station. A worker young, no more than 20, lay pinned beneath steel bars. Rosie ran to help. She didn't think, she just moved. Together, workers lifted the frame, piece by piece. The man's leg was shattered. Blood seeped into the concrete floor. The medics took him away, the dark stain left behind as a reminder. Production resumed within the hour. It had to. The war didn't stop for broken bones. Rosie's hands shook the rest of her shift. She understood something new. They were fighting a different war. But a war, nonetheless. A war of muscles, machinery, and sheer endurance. A call to lead. Rosie steps up. Several weeks after the accident, the senior inspector revisited the idea he had hinted at months earlier. He approached Rosie during lunch break, clipboard in hand. "We need someone for precision calibration, highly detailed work, training others. You're the best we've got." Rosie blinked, stunned. "You want me to supervise?" "Not supervise," he corrected. "Lead." Leadership had never been offered to her before, not in school, not at home, not in town. The idea felt both thrilling and terrifying. She accepted. Her new responsibilities: ensuring rivet alignment across structural beams, inspecting internal systems, training new recruits, many older than she, correcting errors that could cost pilots their lives, managing small teams of both men and women. The first day, a few older workers muttered, "A girl? Showing us how to fix this?" But Rosie's expertise silenced doubt. She didn't lecture. She demonstrated. Her confidence became a quiet authority. The peak of production industry changes the war. By late 1943, the Allied industrial miracle was undeniable. In America, one B-24 rolled out every 55 minutes at Willow Run. Liberty ships were assembled in days instead of months. Ammunition crates filled entire freight trains. Factories employed 3 million women, many nicknamed Rosie. In Britain, underground factories built Spitfires, safe from bombing. Women assembled radar sets crucial to detecting German aircraft. Female welders worked on the hulls of escort vessels guarding Atlantic convoys. Munitions output soared, keeping armies supplied through North Africa and Italy. It was not hyperbole. The Allies were winning because of industrial power. And industrial power existed because women stepped into roles no one had imagined for them. This was the crescendo of Rosie's contribution. She was now a specialist, a trainer, a problem solver. But victory was far from certain. The war would escalate. Demands would intensify. The emotional and physical toll would deepen. Rosie sensed change coming, not the gentle kind, but the kind that sweeps nations like a storm. A quiet, heavy moment. The shift ends near midnight. Snow falls outside the plant, muffling the world. Rosie steps into the cold, her breath visible like smoke. In her coat pocket, she carries her brother's last letter. The ink is fading. The 2-month silence is deafening. She stares at the sky. Somewhere across the ocean, soldiers fight through mud, snow, and fire. Somewhere, machines that she helped build roar through clouds. She had become more than a symbol, more than a poster, more than an idea. She was a craftsman of war, shaping metal, shaping destiny, while fear and hope battled inside her. Rosie walks toward the bus stop, boots crunching on the icy ground. Tomorrow, she'll return to the plant. The war isn't waiting. Neither will she. The weight of 1,944. A blast furnace glows red in the darkness. Sparks dance like angry fireflies. Workers move in silhouette, slow, heavy, deliberate. Rosie lifts a wing panel with 2 others, their breath visible in the freezing air. By 1,944, the Allied war machine was unstoppable. Tanks rolled off assembly lines, aircraft filled the skies, and ships launched like steel waves. But strength has a cost, and the cost was paid by the hands that never held a weapon. The camera lingers on Rosie's eyes, bloodshot, exhausted but still determined. She is still showing up, still carrying steel, still holding the line. But inside her, something is starting to crack. The human limit when work demands everything. Rosie's days blur into an unbroken chain of shifts. Overtime becomes mandatory. Sundays disappear. Breaks shrink. Production quotas rise again and again. A new sign hangs above the line. Build one more. Win the war. The physical toll. Her arms ache constantly now. Her wrists burn from the vibration of rivet guns. She wraps cloth strips around her hands to protect blisters that never heal. Hearing loss becomes common. Workers shout but barely hear each other. Rosie's once quick stride now has a limp. A doctor tells her she has early-stage tendinitis in both wrists. Rest, he says. Rest. In wartime? She laughs. But not because it's funny. The emotional collapse of a friend. Rosie returns to her shared room one evening to find Gloria, her partner on the line, sitting silently on her bunk. A folded telegram rests on her lap. Rosie knows immediately what it is. The telegram is short, precisely typed, merciless. We regret to inform you that Staff Sergeant Robert Hale has been killed in action. Gloria doesn't cry. She doesn't scream. She simply stares. Rosie sits beside her. No words. Just the weight of two women carrying grief large enough to swallow sound itself. The next morning, Gloria doesn't come to work. By the end of the week, her workstation is filled by a new recruit. War consumes not just soldiers but the hearts of those left behind. Tension in the factory. Men return. Roles collide. As the war turns in the Allies' favor, some injured soldiers return home. They enter factories with mixed emotions. Anger, pride, resentment, confusion. Many see women doing the jobs they once held. Conflict arises. Verbal disputes. You're doing it wrong. I did this before you ever touched a tool. Move aside, sweetheart. Women glare back, tired of proving themselves. Rosie confronts a returning veteran. One afternoon, Rosie corrects a misaligned rivet placed by Tom, a veteran with a fresh leg injury. Tom snaps. Little lady, I was building these before you even knew which end of the wrench to hold. Rosie doesn't raise her voice. You fought your war, she says softly. I'm fighting mine. The supervisor overhears. He sides with Rosie. Tom looks stunned. Rosie walks away, her hands shaking, part anger, part guilt, part exhaustion. The British front women under bombardment. Across the Atlantic, Britain faces its own breaking point. V1 and V2, rocket terror. German rockets strike London and other cities without warning. Factories shake from explosions miles away. Women dive under benches, then rise to resume work. Underground aircraft factories. British women work in tunnels carved deep into hillsides. Days pass without sunlight. Air is stale. Bombers thunder overhead. Women wrap scarves over their faces to keep dust from choking them. Rosie reads their stories. Rosie sees newspaper clippings pinned near the cafeteria. Women work through bombing raid. Munition girl saves others in explosion. The brave queens of the factory line. She folds one article into her pocket. At home, she smooths it on her pillow and whispers, "If they can keep going, so can I." It's the closest thing to a prayer she's made in weeks. The night of the broken machine. At 2 a.m., a catastrophic malfunction halts Willow Run's production line. A vital shaping press jams metal bent and dangerously misaligned. Engineers panic. Hours of downtime could derail an entire week's schedule. Supervisors scramble. The plant director himself storms onto the floor. "Who knows the calibration tolerances for this press?" he shouts. Nobody answers. Except Rosie. She steps forward, voice hoarse. "I do." She crawls inside the machine, dark, cramped, hot as a furnace. She measures tolerances with bare fingertips. She shouts instructions to mechanics. Her hair singes. Her arm gets cut on a jagged panel. But after 90 grueling minutes, the press groans back to life. A roar erupts across the floor. Production resumes. The plant director pulls Rosie aside. "You just saved this week's quota." Rosie nods weakly. Part gratitude, part exhaustion. That night, she collapses on her bunk without removing her boots. Day approaches pressure like never before. Rumors spread. The Allies are preparing something enormous. Orders triple. Aircraft wings, spare parts, and ammunition are needed in impossible numbers. Supervisors tell workers, "If you slow down now, boys will die on the beaches." Rosie swallows hard. Her brother might be among those boys. The final push before D-Day. The plant becomes a battlefield of sweat and metal. Triple shifts. No days off. Assembly lines running 24 hours. Food delivered directly to workstations. Sleeping cots set up in hallways. Women pin up maps of Europe, marking frontline progress with colored pins. Every rivet feels like a heartbeat. Every completed panel feels like a lifeline. Rosie begins keeping a tally on the back of her paycheck envelope. how many aircraft she personally contributed to. It becomes a ritual, a silent promise. Rosie's health declines, but she refuses to stop. Her wrist tendons swell so badly, she can't bend her fingers in the morning. She hides the pain by taping her wrists tightly before shifts. She begins dropping tools. She sometimes sees double from sheer fatigue. She has fainted twice, once in the washroom, once holding a drill. The plant nurse warns her, "One more collapse, and I'll pull you off the line." Rosie nods, but doesn't mean it. Inside her heart, a dangerous conviction grows. If I quit, someone else dies. Her identity has fused with the war effort. Stopping feels like betrayal. The letter. The moment everything shatters. One rainy evening, Rosie arrives home to find an envelope waiting for her. Her name is typed perfectly across the front. U.S. Army letterhead. Her vision blurs. She knows. Hands trembling, she tears it open. Your brother, Private First Class Samuel Bennett, has been wounded in action. Severe injuries. Hospitalized in England. Hopendu. Rosie drops into a chair. The world thuds around her like distant artillery. He's alive, but broken, hurt, far from home. She sobs for the first time in months, raw, shaking, purging months of fear. And then something strange happens. She stands, wipes her tears, picks up her lunch pail, heads to her night shift. Nothing will stop her now. The day the factory holds its breath. The 6th of June, 1944. The day begins with rumors whispered across the plant floor. Then the announcement echoes through the loudspeaker. The invasion of Europe has begun. A silence washes over the factory, impossible silence, in a place of constant noise. Women freeze, tools in hand. Some pray. Some cry. Some stare at nothing. Rosie grips the edge of her workbench so hard, her knuckles turn white. Sam might be out there, right now, facing fire, steel, chaos. A foreman speaks into a megaphone. Ladies and gentlemen, every machine you built is there with them today. Today, they fly with your wings. Production resumes, but now, every rivet feels sacred. The line moves with a mixture of dread and pride. Rosie receives a new role, a test of courage. 3 days after D-Day, Rosie is called into the supervisor's office. A senior engineer in glasses stands beside a sealed crate. He says softly, "Rosie, we need you in final inspection. High-level work. Zero margin for error." "Why me?" she whispers. "Because you're the best we have." She opens the crate. Inside lies the most delicate part of a bomber's navigation system, a gyroscopic unit requiring absolute precision. Rosie's eyes widen. She has seen men with decades of experience fail these inspections. "Can I do it?" she asks. The engineer places a hand on her shoulder. "You already have." Her hands stop trembling for the first time in weeks. The crash a grim reminder. That same week, a training bomber crashes near the airfield connected to the plant. Smoke rises into the sky. Sirens wail. Ambulances scream past the factory gates. Workers pour outside, hearts pounding. Rosie stands in the field, staring at the burning metal. She recognizes the aircraft model. It's one she helped build. Her breath catches. A deep, haunting thought crawls into her mind. What if I missed something? What if I made a mistake? What if I'm responsible? Guilt saturates her like oil. The supervisor finds her frozen. "It wasn't an equipment failure," he assures her. "Pilot training accident." But the doubt doesn't leave. Not fully. It never will. Rosie reaches her breaking point. During a midnight shift, Rosie's vision suddenly blurs. Her knees buckle. Tools clatter to the floor. Machines warp in her sight. She collapses. Workers rush to her. The plant nurse orders her to stop working for a week. "A week?" Rosie cries. "They need me, my brother." But her body has reached its limit. They carry her to a cot in the hallway. She stares at the ceiling, chest rising and falling like a wounded soldier. For the first time, Rosie fears she won't be able to return. The turning point, a visit from a friend. The next day, Gloria, pale, grieving, but steady, visits Rosie. She sits beside the cot and takes Rosie's bandaged hand. "You can't keep going like this," Gloria whispers. "You're not a machine." Rosie shakes her head. "My brother, the war, I have to." "No," Gloria interrupts gently. "You have to survive too. Otherwise, everything you've done is lost." Rosie begins to cry again, not in fear, but in release. It's the first time she realizes she's human. She's allowed to break. She's allowed to heal. The quiet before the final push. The factory continues without her. Lines move. Rivets are set. Aircraft roll out. War marches onward. But Rosie lies on the cot, breathing slowly, letting her strength return grain by grain. She gave everything: her sleep, her body, her hope. She fought a war that had no front line. And now, for the first time, Rosie faced herself. Not as a symbol, not as a legend, but as a woman who had reached the edge and found the courage to step back. She closes her eyes. Tomorrow, she will rise again. But tonight, she rests. A quiet morning before the end. The whistle blows softly over Willow Run. Not the sharp, urgent blast of wartime, but a gentler tone, as if the factory itself is exhaling after years of holding its breath. Rosie walks through the gates again. Her hands bandaged but steady. Her steps slower but firmer. The sky is gray, the air heavy. In 1945, victory was coming. Everyone could feel it in the papers, in the production lines, in the exhausted hearts of the workers. But before the end, there would be one last storm. Return to the line, a different Rosie. Rosie returns to her post after her forced week of rest. The factory seems louder than ever, yet strangely different. Faces look older. Bodies move with the stiffness of overwork. Laughs are quieter. But Rosie brings with her a new clarity. For months, she had believed her worth came solely from endurance, from refusing to break. Now she understands something deeper. Strength isn't never falling. Strength is rising again by choice. Her team welcomes her back with relief. Gloria hugs her tightly. Even Tom, the injured veteran, nods respectfully. Rosie picks up her rivet gun. Her wrists ache, but she breathes through it, steady and controlled. She's ready. The final production surge. Industry goes into overdrive. The winter of 1944-45 is brutal. Snow piles against the factory walls. Inside, the heat of machinery makes the air thick and humid. Orders escalate again. Germany is weakening, but desperate. The Pacific War rages with unimaginable ferocity. Every tank, every plane, every bullet matters. Rosie works calibration and final inspection. She checks instruments with surgeon-like precision. She trains new workers, young women, older women, mothers, widows. Some are terrified of the rivet gun. Rosie places her hands over theirs. "Feel the rhythm," she whispers. "Don't fight the machine. Move with it." Her calm transfers into them. In these final months, Rosie becomes more than a worker. She becomes a teacher, a mentor, a quiet leader. News from the front. The end begins. March 1945. Newspapers announce Allied troops crossing the Rhine. Factories erupt in cheers. Rosie reads every headline twice, searching for mention of the hospital where her brother recovers. One afternoon, her supervisor hands her a letter. It's thin, too thin. Rosie's heart freezes. She opens it with trembling fingers. It's from Sam. "I'll be coming home soon." Rosie presses the letter to her chest and lets herself sob. Not from grief, but from overwhelming relief. She whispers to herself. He's coming home. He's coming home. Gloria embraces her. For a moment, the war feels conquerable. Hitler falls a wave of tears. The 8th of May, 1945, VE Day. The plant loudspeakers crackle. The plant manager's voice, usually stern, trembles. Ladies and gentlemen, Germany has surrendered. A sound rises in the factory unlike anything Rosie has heard. Not cheers, not shouts. It is a wave of crying. Women drop tools. Men fall to their knees. Laughing, crying, hugging, many unable to speak. Rosie feels her knees weaken. She leans on Gloria. Her bandana grows damp with tears. They had built a victory they might never fully grasp. A war ended in Europe. And in thousands of factories, another war ended in the hearts of its workers. The line stops. For the first time in years, everything stops. When men return the aftershock. As victory celebrations fade, a new tension spreads across the home front. Men begin returning from battlefields, weary, wounded, proud, lost. And many expect their old jobs back. Conflict rises again. Supervisors start calling women into offices. Layoff notices appear. The message is clear. Thank you for your service. Return to home life now. Rosie watches friends file out of the plant with final checks clutched in hand. Some cry, some rage, some simply nod, accepting the inevitable. Rosie is called in. One morning, her supervisor summons her. Rosie stands straight, expecting the words everyone is hearing. But instead, he sighs. Rosie, you've been essential here. But the company is reducing the women's shifts. We don't have a choice. Rosie clenches her jaw. All she asks is, how long? 2 more weeks. She nods, not out of agreement, but out of dignity. Sam comes home. A brother changed. Rosie stands at the train station as her brother's unit arrives. Sam steps off the train, thin, pale, leaning on a cane. His eyes are older, quieter. He smiles when he sees her, but the smile doesn't reach those eyes. Rosie rushes to him, hugging him carefully. Sam whispers, "It's really over, Rosie. We made it home." Rosie wants to say that she fought too, in her own way, but instead, she just holds him, letting him lean on her. That evening, as she cooks dinner, Sam watches her hands. "You look stronger than I remember," he says softly. Rosie glances at her calloused palms. "I had to be." The last day at Willow Run. The whistle blows for the final time. Women gather in the break room. Boxes packed. Lockers emptied. Some take home their gloves. Some take bolts, rivets, or badges as souvenirs. Rosie stands at her workstation. The place where she grew up, broke down, rose again. Gloria places an arm around her shoulders. "We did it," Gloria whispers. Rosie nods, though tears sting her eyes. She unscrews her nameplate, Rosie B., and pockets it. As she walks away, she touches the metal skin of one final aircraft rolling down the line. "Fly safe," she whispers to it. The war's aftermath. A new battle begins. Post-war America is a strange world. Women who built bombers, ships, tanks, and ammunition are expected to return to housework, ironing, marriage, motherhood, silence. Some comply easily. Some resent it. Some refuse. Rosie finds herself uncertain. She has skills, confidence, leadership. But society pushes back. Job postings read, "Men only." Factories reverse training programs. Unions tighten membership. A newspaper editorial declares, "Women have done their part. Let them now return to their rightful place." Rosie folds the paper quietly. She is not angry. She is not resigned. She is simply awake. What future does Rosie choose? One afternoon, Rosie walks through town with Sam. She sees a classroom full of children. A teacher guiding them through a lesson. And something clicks in her mind. She doesn't want to build engines anymore. She wants to build futures. Rosie applies to become a teacher. The interview committee stares at her resume. You worked aircraft calibration? You led inspections? You trained adults? Rosie nods. Well, one committee member says, teaching requires patience, precision, and the ability to guide people through difficulty. She smiles. I've had practice. Sam beams when he hears she's been accepted. Rosie begins taking night classes to certify. During the day, she helps Sam recover. At night, she studies under a warm lamp. She's exhausted, but it's a different kind of exhaustion. Not from war, but from rebuilding. The nation rediscovers its working women. Years pass. The world changes again. The 1,950 seconds bring domestic pressure. The 1,960 seconds bring revolution. The 1,970 seconds bring women's rights movements. Photographs of wartime factories reappear. Articles are written. Historians dig through archives. And slowly, painfully, America and Britain begin to recognize the truth. The war was won not only by soldiers, but by women like Rosie. Women who riveted, welded, machined, shipped, and built the weapons of liberation. Rosie watches documentaries and reads articles as she sits in her small living room, older now, hair streaked with gray. Sometimes, she sees the famous poster. The strong woman with the raised arm, and the bold words, "We can do it." And she smiles softly, because she knows the truth. That poster wasn't a symbol of perfection. It wasn't a fantasy. It wasn't a slogan. It was a mirror, a reflection of millions of real women, each one strong in her own quiet way. The legacy. Rosie's final monologue. In her twilight years, Rosie stands in front of a classroom of young students learning about the Second World War. A poster of the home front hangs behind her. One student raises a hand. Miss Bennett, did women really build airplanes? Rosie nods, her voice calm, steady, proud. We did. We built airplanes, tanks, jeeps, ships, radios, engines, parachutes. We built whatever the world needed. Another student asks, weren't you scared? Rosie smiles. All the time. But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what you must, despite fear. She pauses. And remember this, the world you live in was built by hands like yours. Hands that learn. Hands that try. Hands that refuse to stop. Her students fall silent, moved by her words. Rosie folds her hands. The same hands that once held rivet guns, calibrated instruments, lifted engine mounts. Hands that shaped victory. The poster, the woman, the legend. Rosie sits at her kitchen table one evening, watching the sunset glow through the window. In front of her lies a framed copy of the famous poster. Her brother Sam, older now, rests his hand on her shoulder. You know, he says softly, I always knew the war was won because of people like you. Rosie exhales slowly, her eyes misting. I just did what I could. Sam shakes his head. No, Rosie. You did what no one thought you could. The camera pans out. The factory whistle echoes faintly, a memory, a ghost of the past. She entered the war as one woman. She emerged as millions. A symbol of strength, sacrifice, and the quiet power that shapes history. Her name was Rosie, and she helped build the world we live in. Fade to black.